then we will have seen a great investment in the future of this country.
Honourable Joe Goodhue.
Mr. Speaker, well, I begin my address this afternoon by saying that I'm heartened to hear some words from the other side of the House that, in fact, are words that there are some, there's some common ideas here about protecting the vulnerable. That's what we did during the recession. About improving the ability of those who are vulnerable, in fact, to actually get a good education. That's what this government is actually doing. An export-led recovery. We heard it several times. It's just that here in this Parliament, this government is delivering it in a totally different style to the style that was under the Clark government, where I believe that member was a minister. So on the 26th of November, the people of New Zealand spoke. And as in all elections, the mood of the day and the months leading up to the election was reflected in the vote. The people of New Zealand voted an increased percentage for this, the national government led by John Key. And you know, in elections in time gone by, it's most unusual for a second-term government to have an increased percentage of their vote. Most unusual indeed, but that in fact is what the people of New Zealand delivered on election day last year. I'd like to spend a bit of time, rehearsing why I think that happened, because as a nation, we've had a pretty tough time of it. And in fact, the vulnerable of this nation have had the toughest time of it. Unfortunately, New Zealand actually beat the gun into recession. And that was, again, because of the policies of the Clark government. So having settled into the realms of recession, with job losses occurring, with youth unemployment getting higher and higher, and the fact that the tradable sector hadn't actually started to shrink since the recession, but started very early back in 2004, I believe, way before the recession, the state sector had been allowed, no, not perhaps allowed, nay, encouraged to gobble through the healthy surpluses as if there was no tomorrow. But then, of course, hang on, there was no tomorrow come November 2008 for the Clark government. So we added to that toxic mix of tax and spend devastating earthquakes and a raft of other challenges. New Zealand was facing down the barrel of many gloomy tomorrows. But John Key and his ministers and MPs were up to the challenge, because really, was there a choice? They had to step up to the mark, and they did. So after years of tax and spend, this government certainly set out knowing that was not the way to a brighter future in New Zealand. We had the sobering responsibility of managing the economy and the country through tough times, protecting those who were the most vulnerable, and all the while there were additional vulnerable people being added to that group. That's what happens in recessions. The trust and the goodwill that the public of New Zealand conferred upon us on election day, the 26th of November, was in fact a solemn challenge, because our status as a first world nation has come under threat by policies of old, policies of the last government under Clark. Now, in order to further protect the vulnerable New Zealanders, we have to challenge the policy settings. We have to change those policy settings so, in fact, we lessen their vulnerability with enduring and sustainable policies. Strong, continued and stable government is the way forward, but the stability has to be with purpose, purpose to grow our economy so we all have a brighter future. The plan, it's a comprehensive one, and that action plan was announced in policy prior to the election. But it's not a one-liner. It's not about tax and spend. It is about a brighter future, and there's a fair heap of work in there that needs to be done. But it's worth working hard for. It's worth striving for. We have 4 priorities, and those priorities lay down the challenges that we must achieve to have a brighter future. The Finance Minister spoke in the House today about New Zealand earning an income, not borrowing it. Never been a truer word spoken. New Zealand families who are making ends meet at this part of the year, when it's so tough for families with the post-Christmas and the getting into school time, they are making ends meet with their finances. So they are very pleased to hear that our number one priority is to responsibly manage the government's finances. You see, as I often reassure my constituents, it's not the government's money. That's the way the Clark government treated it, but it's not the government's money. It's the taxpayers' money, and they worked hard to earn it, and they want us to make very good use of it. Our second priority is about building a more productive and competitive economy, and that is a pathway to a brighter future. The third priority, examining public services under this tight fiscal setting and making our public services better. Lastly, and one that resonates very much with me and with the other Canterbury MPs, is our priority to rebuild our second largest city of Christchurch. And I'll say something I've said in speeches over the last year or so. You know, I just don't think the majority of New Zealanders even knew it was our second largest city until we started describing it as that, as we identified the magnitude of the task ahead. So I'm heartened that the rebuild is amongst the top four. We respect the work that has already been done by the government as Canterbury MPs. And we're very, very pleased that there is money in the bank there for that rebuild. New Zealand's future economic stability is going to be best served by us being returned to surplus by 2014-15. But it needs a firm and steady hand on the tiller to achieve that. Well, there's lots of analogies about making the boat go faster around the place. And I'd like to remind the House of the spectre of a combination of the parties opposite steering our boat, New Zealand. With their combined policies, I believe we were looking at a potential Costa Concordia. Being fiscally responsible isn't just about balancing the government's books. The flow on to the people of New Zealand will also mean it'll be keeping pressure off interest rates, which is the single biggest cost to our households. We need to reverse, as a nation, the downward spiral that the Clark government thrust New Zealand into when the tradable sector was not growing. New Zealand was always going to be living beyond its means and its productive capacity under settings such as that. We want to see an export-focused economy built on a solid base of innovation, selling more of what the world wants at a competitive price. That's actually quite a big ask. That's quite a comprehensive goal to be setting. And our economic action plan will follow through on the progress we've actually made in the last 3 years. We've prioritised better public services, and we've made some good progress already. We've found the phantom trainees in the ITO sector. We've actually found them, and we know that money was going to waste. We're reforming government purchasing of supplies such as vehicles and IT hardware. And, you know, the first 4 joint procurement projects alone are expected to save around $115 million over the next 5 years. There are many more examples. The programme of action is comprehensive. Now we are also looking at the state sector right across it, at how it is organised. We need to streamline and improve the way it works for New Zealand's sake. And lastly, I want to touch again on that fourth priority of rebuilding Christchurch. We're getting on with the challenge. It's a monstrously big challenge. Much of the demolition has taken place, and I want to pay tribute to the former Timaru District Council Chief Executive, Warwick Isaacs, who is handling some of the overseeing of the demolition projects. Empty spaces create opportunities for rebuilding. There'll be grief and there'll be loss at what those empty spaces mean, the memories. But Christchurch deserves a government that is purposefully going to commit to rebuilding it. The people of Canterbury deserve that. We've put 4,500 places for construction-related training in Canterbury and around the country. And we've also put a temporary 17,000-seat stadium in there for the Cantabrians who love sport. It's a bit like saying, is the Pope Catholic? Of course they love sport down in Canterbury. So it is very much one of our high priorities, $5.5 billion committed to the Earthquake Recovery Fund. This government's share, that money, that is this government's share of rebuilding local infrastructure and to repair Crown-owned assets. We have a big challenge ahead of us as a government. Those 4 priorities say it all. They are part of a wider economic development plan that will build a stronger economy for New Zealand. It's a big challenge, but this government is up to it.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you,